grab your refreshments, grab your snacks, sit on down. We got a great presentation for you today. So Brian's going to be presenting for us. He will have time for questions, but questions are going to be at the end. So I've got a mobile microphone, so when question time comes, I'll bring the microphone to you. If you're online and you've got a question, make sure to put a question in the chat. We'll be able to unmute you so you can actually speak to Brian directly. But yeah, so that's what's going to happen there. So our speaker today is Brian Jackson. He is presenting on the Dan Burisch story, with 13 years specifically dedicated to researching the controversial claims of Dr. Dan Burisch and a total of 37 years investigating UFOs and UAPs. Brian's journey began in the early internet era on platforms like FidoNet and Paranet. Wow, that is old stuff. This foundational research involving traditional methods and collaboration with prominent figures has consistently focused on critical areas, including Area 51 and the Papoose Lake facilities, underground installations, and the MyLab abduction phenomenon. Despite contributing significant data to the field, Brian has intentionally remained a behind-the-scenes researcher. He is a graduate of the Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, California, and resides in Los Angeles, California. And honestly, our member Risa Cohen, she had a huge part of getting Brian to present to us. So got to give Risa a big round of applause. And of course, let's welcome Brian Jackson.
Well, thank you. I don't know if you could see me on screen. I was going to first just give a thanks for the invitation. I think it stemmed from Risa and a good friend of mine. So I was very happy to take this on. I wish I could be there in person, of course. I would love to visit Minnesota, but hopefully our paths will cross there in the future. But I first wanted to start, and I'm not sure how many of your audience would be familiar with this particular case, but I wanted to start by showing a slide that I put together relatively recently, and that is this one. You know, this is a big case and the rabbit holes go very, very deep. And what I can tell you is that the majority of the information I'll be presenting today is open source. And so what you're going to see is essentially 3 buckets of information. You're going to see verification, which has to do with documents, birth records, degrees, affidavits, records of education, evidence and supportive correspondence of his work. And then corroboration, which is getting a little more personal for me, my trust and friendship with the initial investigator in the case, Bill Hamilton, and his thorough research approach, the testimony of other investigators, and quite honestly, the sheer volume of interviews of Dan in the form of video and audio, and actually articles as well. And then the last bucket, in terms of credibility, is very personal to me, something I can only convey from what I experienced, which is my personal relationship to this story, which included correspondences with Dan and his team, and one phone call they allowed me to have with Dan. So with that, I'm going to switch over to my presentation. Go play. And do you see this okay? I'm going to assume there's a thumbs up there from everybody. So Dan Burisch was at the heart of controversy in the early 2000s. But by 2008, his presence had significantly diminished within the broader UFO research community. Today, he's virtually absent from the current conversations on the phenomenon. And I've entitled this Refocusing the Dan Burisch Story because I believe that his claims remain deeply significant. The biology of a living captive extraterrestrial, technologies that revealed potential future timelines, and most importantly, alleged agreements with multiple species, agreements that may be critical to humanity's preparation for what was to become a major catastrophe. For a while, I stepped away from focused study within ufology, but the depth of what's at stake demands renewed attention to his story. And in the words of a friend, Bill Ryan, who used to be with Project Camelot, his story does not lend itself to easy summary. But this unique case does yield one significant gem, a rare find with any insider or whistleblower claim, and that is an overwhelming amount of material to study, hardly the result of a hoax, fraud, or as one journalist wrote about Dan, a phony baloney goofball. I contend that some people drew conclusions about him far too early, or they are driven by an agenda. But let's clear this up early. The last name Crane and Burisch are used as a last name for Dan in this presentation. Some have wrongly taken this as evidence of deceit, but in truth, Dan legally changed his name to Burisch in 1995 after marrying Deborah K. Burisch, honoring her stepdaughter's wishes to keep that name. But after their divorce in 2007, he reverted back to Crane. Most of the material I'll discuss occurred during the Burisch period, which is how he's best known. Here are the main points to the story. Dan began his biological studies in 1982 at University of Nevada, Las Vegas. While there in 1986, at age 22, he was recruited by the US government to work on classified programs. As his security clearance increased, the US Navy co-funded his doctoral studies for his PhD in microbiology and molecular genetics from the State University of New York. Dan completed his degree and received his PhD in 1989. He worked under Majestic on Project Aquarius, eventually becoming the working group leader in the study of a living extraterrestrial entity being housed in a special environmental clean sphere at the Papoose Site 4 facility south of Groom Lake, Nevada. His primary task involved biological tissue sampling and genetic studies to address the J-rod's severe peripheral neuropathy and degenerative disorder. This required developing a unique DNA sequencing technique, and Dan often experienced the J-rod's pain directly due to the psychic connection, fostering deep compassion. By the way, the entity's name was nicknamed J-rod as a species identification, not a personal name. The work eventually granted him rare access to world-altering technologies and information, ultimately leading to his placement within Majestic's group, who also quietly influenced decisions affecting all of humanity without the public's awareness. The MJ-12 leader at the time, and whom was designated MJ-1, was US Vice Admiral John Mike McConnell. He served 29 years in the military. He was former Vice Admiral in the US Navy. He served as the director of the National Security Agency from 1992 to 1996, and as the United States Director of National Intelligence from February 2007 to January 2009, during the Bush administration and the first week of the Obama administration. For reasons too complicated to summarize here, he and Dan were very close, and this bond would yield tremendous benefits and privileges while Dan was on the program. McConnell and Dr. Edward Taylor played a crucial role in recruiting Dan into Project Aquarius. A significant part of this program was conducted at Groom Lake, Nevada, commonly known as Area 51, now renamed Air Force Test Center Detachment 3. Project Aquarius was initiated in 1953 to study extraterrestrial life forms, and in Dan's case, an individual species known as a J-rod. The J-rod was one of two kept alive from the infamous Kingman, Arizona crash of 1953. One was sent to Los Alamos National Laboratory to a facility nicknamed Sweetness, and one transferred to Area 51, and one relocated to to S4 facility, located 12 miles southwest of the main Groom Lake base. S4 is a highly classified subterranean facility in a remote area of the desert, extending 5 levels deep. The facility itself is meticulously camouflaged, reinforcing the deep secrecy of the program. Within the lowest level of the complex, a specialized chamber was constructed to maintain the precise environmental conditions necessary for the J-rod's survival. Dan's responsibilities required direct interaction with the being, primarily for biological tissue sampling and genetic studies. Dan, along with his work associate, Dr. Arthur Price, made significant advances in developing a unique sequencing technique for DNA that would ultimately reveal the J-rod's connection to our future human lineage, and that the being was unquestionably a time traveler. The being was suffering from a peripheral neuropathy, a congenital condition causing muscle atrophy, difficulty walking, and an inability to regulate body temperature due to a lack of antifreeze glycoproteins. Dan would ultimately learn that factions within the US government held long-term agreements with various other life forms beyond the J-rods, and that these agreements are revisited every 9 years. Who remembers here David Grush not responding in the negative when asked twice by Ross Coulthart if we have agreements with NHI? This revelation is one of the most significant takeaways from this presentation, as I believe these agreements still influence the current disclosure movement and quite possibly current major geopolitical decisions worldwide. One of the most extraordinary technologies at the time within the S4 Papoose facility was the looking glass device, along with the Orion Cube. Both allowed for glimpses into future events and the ability to foresee outcomes in advance. Information obtained from these devices was critical, revealing potential future catastrophes, details about certain JROD's actions that could lead to a potential downfall in 2012, and indicating that humanity's unity and a rising consciousness might be vital for survival during a period of transition. The Orion Cube required specifically trained individuals who could emotionally connect with the device. To serve the evolving needs of the MJ-12 group, later renamed the Committee of the Majority, one of the treaty agreements with non-human intelligence mandated the eventual disclosure of their existence to the world. This was intended to prepare humanity for extraterrestrial contact and mitigate potential catastrophic consequences, ethical considerations, concerns over genetic implications, and the need to ensure a balanced future for humanity further reinforce the urgency of this initiative. Eventually, as a result, Dan was elevated to an entry-level position within Majestic that served multiple strategic purposes. One, it enhanced his public credibility and perception for disclosure. Two, facilitated negotiations and diplomatic efforts, both foreign and domestic, to guide humanity's future. And most importantly, position him as the face of disclosure, allowing him to speak openly about his background and education. However, it was later revealed that Dan harbored deep resentment toward Majestic for selecting him for this role. While he honored their wishes, Dan never wanted to be the public face of disclosure. So, it's now abundantly clear that these extraordinary claims must be weighed against substantive evidence. We did not have the privilege of accessing the facilities where Dan worked, participating in shadowy conversations, or witnessing what he experienced firsthand. But a common method of research for evaluating such claims is to gather as much intelligence as possible about the individual making them. Is he truly who he claims to be? Did he work where he said he did? Were there others who could contribute to his story? What conclusions have other investigators reached after examining his claims? To begin, let's take a closer look at who Dan Burisch is. Dan Burisch grew up in Linwood, California. His parents were John and Doreen Crane. His mother was a telex operator, and his father worked for the Purex company in Southgate. Important to establish early on is that in 1973, when Dan was 8 years old, he had an abduction episode while playing catch with his grandfather near their home at Mayboyer Park. Dan witnessed a chevron-shaped craft and had missing time for hours. Years later, Dan came to understand that he had been abducted by occupants of a UFO and intellectually enhanced for a specific purpose related to his future work for the US government. After this experience, Dan suddenly had an interest in the sciences, especially microscopy, and soon he was gifted his first Tasco microscope for Christmas. Later, he would be taken under the wing of Dr. Jim Reynolds, the director of pathology from Long Beach Memorial Hospital here in California, where he was taught the art and science of histology and medical microbiology. At 15, Dan became the youngest member of the Los Angeles Microscopical Society. During this time, elements within the US government began to take notice of him. This type of monitoring is not unusual, as even today, the Navy actively promotes STEM and GATE education to cultivate young talent for future career opportunities, particularly within the military and defense sectors. Programs like the Office of Naval Research fund educational initiatives and research projects, often in collaboration with schools, universities, and scientific institutions. The government's interest was initially tentative, but noted his aptitude for recognizing and identifying patterns under magnification. Eventually, in college, during his last semester at University of Nevada, Las Vegas, Dan was approached by 3 men who offered him employment in a secret biology-related program. After a significant time of testing, this led to his involvement in top secret black budget operations and eventually work with Majestic. For a short time while in the program, and while also pursuing his PhD, partially funded with the assistance from Dr. Edward Teller, Dan was required to maintain a cover job. He worked as a parole and probation officer for the state of Nevada, and occasionally he worked security at the Sahara, Fiesta, and Aladdin casinos. During this time, government agents would occasionally bring tissue samples of unknown origin to his office, along with a high-powered microscope for analysis. Dan's professors were informed that he was a student of special government interest. He received specialized learning modules from the State University of New York and occasionally flown there for advanced studies under military escort. He also completed assignments and testing in Las Vegas. Dan successfully defended his dissertation on his thesis entitled The Use of Hyperchlorite Complexes on Malignant Tissue, and earned his doctorate in cellular biology in 1989. His professors from State University of New York were flown to Las Vegas to administer his final examination. Now, this is how I first came into the story. I'd been studying UFO phenomenon since 1989, but in 2012, after taking several years away from active research to focus on raising my family, I decided to use my work's lunch hour to revisit some of the more controversial cases from the past. And as I explored, I came across the testimony from Bill Uhouse, an engineer from Los Alamos National Laboratory, who similarly claimed to have encountered a J-rod at that institution. But keep in mind, I knew nothing about Dan. I knew nothing about the J-rod at S4, any of it. I discovered that veteran researcher Bill Hamilton was the principal investigator of the Dan Burisch story. He was highly respected by all in the UFO research community. Known for his rigorous investigative approach, consistently grounded in the scientific method, characterized by thorough research, data-driven analysis, and meticulous attention to verifying supported materials. Since 1990, after I first attended one of his lectures, I made it a point to attend every talk he gave. Bill granted me special permission to record his lectures, allowing me to archive at least 20 of his talks. He and his wife Pamela and I remained very close until he relocated to Phoenix in 1997. But important to the story is that he spoke at an event in Los Angeles in the year 2000, and I made sure to attend. He spoke about a fascinating document that had recently leaked on forums known as the Q94-109A, allegedly originating from someone named B.J. Wolf. It was a highly scientific document detailing the study of an extraterrestrial being, describing its biology, composition, and its connection to human DNA. In the lecture, Bill said that BJ was in communication with one of the document's authors, a scientist directly involved in the study. Now let's cut to 2012. I decided to revisit this controversial J-Rod story, despite the broader research community having largely dismissed it as a hoax. But I was still unaware of my friend Bill's connection to the story. Diving in, I discovered a vast amount of material to study. For instance, I found up to 16 videos of Dan, articles written about his life, his claims by prominent researchers, radio interviews, and more. Therefore, I made a conscious decision to follow the story's unfolding from its inception to its conclusion. I began by watching the earliest video interview. The first interview of Dan was from September 2002. To my surprise, I instantly recognized my friend Bill's voice asking questions of Dan, and also referencing a woman off camera. He referred to her as BJ. Again, it's now 2012, and at that moment, everything clicked for me. I connected this detail to my earliest memory of Bill discussing the case back in 2000, and his liaison, BJ. Now I was energized to uncover everything I could about this case, being inspired by Bill's work. Of note was Dan's rebellious personality and always stepping over the line. Dan Burisch was scrutinized, monitored, censored, imprisoned, and beaten many times by operatives within Majestic. He was severely punished for unauthorized release of certain information, specifically a book he co-authored in 1998 entitled Egos Disobey, which discussed anomalies on Mars. His memory was manipulated in 1998 as a consequence of rebelliousness related to the Egos Disobey work. When memory conditioning failed and his memory returned, he reportedly fled, was recaptured, and subjected to reconditioning. Suffice to say, beatings happened whenever he stepped out of line. By the way, this is Bill's book that chronicles all of the details of his research on this case. I highly recommend it. Legendary multi-Emmy winning UFO investigator Linda Howe was also drawn to this case, contributing her research, especially in verifying Dan's academic credentials and testimony from interviews with Dan's parents, Doreen and John, who both recalled the time their son agreed to begin working on classified government projects. They confirmed that on many occasions, Dan was picked up in front of their home by military escorts at all hours of the day and night for transport to Area 51. Dan's mother once followed him and witnessed him boarding the Planet at the Janet terminal at McCarran Airport that flies staff to Area 51. And here's the result of some of my research and the legacy efforts of others that are investigators. Dan worked at some of the most prestigious classified institutions and U.S. government laboratories, including the research facilities at Groom Lake, Dulce at Los Alamos, Brookhaven National Laboratory, and Lawrence Livermore Laboratories. He was also stationed in the Middle East during the First Gulf War, where he served as a defense biowarfare specialist. Most notably, from 1991 to 2006, he worked at Area 51 S4, where much of his classified research took place. Although today Dan is still alive and living in Canada, he remains under strict protection, surrounded by handlers, security, and also a doctor assigned to ensure his well-being. As a result, direct contact with him is now virtually impossible. Admiral McConnell served as both mentor and protector to Dan, often described as a godfather-like figure in his life. In 2005, McConnell appointed Dan as to the seat of Representative Number 9 within Majestic. I would learn of the significance of this seat from a 1.5-hour call I was allowed to have with Dan himself in 2018. It is claimed that McConnell's influence within Majestic and his high-ranking position in national security played a crucial role in allowing him to remain alive, especially given the unsettling details of how over 50 other Black Ops scientists and biologists had died under mysterious circumstances since the early 2000s. Dan claims to have been a member of all the associations listed here, but like many government contractors involved in Black programs, his records have been erased, at least from publicly accessible sources. But the following has been verified by me as being true, what I'm about to read. The erasure of records is a common practice for individuals working on classified projects. It is typically called sheep dipping. This measure serves both as a protective mechanism for the individual and as a tool for plausible deniability if required. By systematically removing official documentation of a person's academic background, professional affiliations, and career history, it becomes nearly impossible for adversaries, whether foreign intelligence agencies or investigative journalists, to track, identify, or verify their expertise. This level of secrecy ensures that even if a name surfaces in connection with a sensitive program, there is no accessible paper trail linking them to classified work, effectively safeguarding both the individual and the integrity of the program itself. This is outlined in the paper written by Douglas C. Yalvin, entitled Sheep Dipped: The Historical Evolution of Covert Military Operations. Dr. Teller expressed interest in Dan's work while Dan was studying at University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and would later reach out to arrange further studies for him with State University of New York for his PhD. During Dan's education at State University of New York, William J. Linares was Dan's supervisor, professor, and possibly the liaison with Dr. Teller. Dr. Linares is an expert in glycoproteins and is a fellow of the American Academy of Sciences. I discovered he was, in fact, a professor at the university at the time Dan claimed to be attending classes there between 1986 and 1989. Here's some additional people, Dan's supervisors and professors at State University of New York. I reached out to all of them on LinkedIn and I'm waiting a reply. Dan's mother was an invaluable resource for research, having catalogs of all of his certifications and other documentation. On this and the following pages are Dan's official certificates of graduation, scholarships, honor society memberships, and scholarship nominations. However, she does not have a chronicle record of Dan's PhD. These are official academic letters of recommendation from Stanford University, University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Here's another from UNLV and also Northern Arizona University. And his name is clearly on these. More affidavits executed in Alberta, Canada. This is a key point that establishes Dan's claimed education. His doctorate and other degrees is clearly listed in multiple marquee who's who journals, and its attainment is affirmed by his parents and a former coworker via sworn affidavits. However, official records at State University of New York were reportedly suppressed or altered, a deliberate action taken as part of the efforts to maintain secrecy around his classified work. Marquise stands as the gold standard for documenting academic and professional excellence. Inclusion is highly selective, offering credible third-party validation of one's expertise. Dan's listing affirms his achievements and provides undeniable proof against skepticism. These two particular journals of the four he was in, I bought on my own just to have a physical copy to see ink on paper, his listing and his PhD circled there, which here is a blow-up of it. In 2018, Dan was invited to speak at Caltech here in California. Dan Burisch and his colleague Marcia McDowell spoke at Caltech's infamous Beckman Auditorium about the Lotus Project, their scientific research project at the request of Professor Human Awadi. Project Lotus is a project that studies a genesis mechanism associated with the tree of life. That is, the investigation of a phenomenon involving silicate material, Ganesh particles, and their potential effects on cellular repair and the origins of life. The full lecture is still available to watch online. The invitation to speak at a prestigious institution like Caltech is reserved for the exceptional. Here's a small list of invited past lecturers. I'm sure we can recognize quite a number of these names that have spoken there at this auditorium. And here, even today, you can go onto the website and see that he actually had the invitation and he spoke there. Some claim Dan is not a scientist. The ability to speak at Caltech with his background would have had to have been verified. And these are screenshots from the lecture, and you can still find it, the whole lecture available online to watch. In latter chapters of Bill Hamilton's book, he notes evidence of a correspondence between two Area 51 employees that spoke of Dan's work there. One is a retired Air Force Major and Intelligence Officer, Thomas Mack. The other is also in the Air Force Intelligence Officer and someone I befriended some time ago. I used the opportunity to reach out to ask if they have any proof of this correspondence. I was happy to find that this person had a handwritten letter from Tom Mack. He quickly scanned it and sent it to me, and what it would reveal was eye-opening. The highlighted area of this April 1999 letter reads, "There was a Captain Danny Crane who was assigned to the QS-4 projects sometime in the late 80s. Captain Crane was a biologist who worked on the R4800 program at PS2 Complex. His assistant was Captain Arthur Price. Both were in charge with mapping alien DNA. Captain Crane developed a sequencing technique. They were dating the sequence of found amino acids. The alien was the quadriloid Amos. The sequence found was nothing like humans. Captain Crane even baffled genetic scientists with his findings. Captain Price is now working with Dr. Kit Green at the CIA." So although it is clearly referencing Dan working there, there's also some confusion about the alien's name and the claim that he was discovering what he was discovering was not human. Let's now dive into the Papoose Lake facility where Dan worked underground. Papoose is approximately 12 miles southwest of Area 51. This shows the relative location that Papoose has to Groom Lake, Area 51, now renamed Air Force Test Center Detachment 3. Various research by others indicates the facility is sometimes referenced as Site 4, S4, S2 Alpha, and from the Tom Mack letter, PS2 Complex. Now let's zoom in and see closer where S4 is. The facility is fully camouflaged from the air, showcasing the cutting-edge ingenuity behind next-generation government black site construction. What I can tell you in this call right now, this presentation, very soon will be revealed something I've been made aware of and I have a copy of that makes unequivocal proof that the facility is exactly right here and that the 9 doors are exactly where it is circled. This is a CGI depiction of the main entrance door. This CGI rendering illustrates a hangar door opening for a test flight of recovered extraterrestrial craft, based on detailed accounts from physicist engineer Bob Lazar, who claimed to have worked on reverse engineering such technology. Testimonies from program workers describe the facility as purely utilitarian, devoid of aesthetics, built for total focus. Heavily armed Black Guard units escort each scientist and engineer to their assigned locations daily. Upon entry, Dan was required to strip and be weighed nude near the entrance. From that point on, extreme anti-smuggling measures were enforced. Even bathroom breaks were under armed escort, with ceiling cameras recording every move. Dan described the atmosphere as deeply oppressive, where only the work mattered. Dan said the facility's labs were state-of-the-art, fully equipped for advanced biological research. For security, weighing sensors were built into the floors of each workstation, tracking scientists' movement in real time. Dan said facility security always knew of his schedule in advance. In elevators, guards stood with their backs to the covered floor buttons, feeling for the correct ones and counting silently, never revealing which floor he was taken to. Aerospace historian Michael Schratt met with Dan to recreate the facility and its interior in exacting detail. When I personally spoke with Michael in 2024, he emphasized how precise Dan was, especially about the clean sphere, which housed the J-Rod for medical research under the Aquarius program. Dan described it as roughly 52 feet wide and 26 feet tall, engineered to match the J-Rod's unique physiology. The environment maintained a hyperbaric mix of 4 to 5% nitrogen and oxygen, high pressure and temperatures between 20 to 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Humans couldn't survive inside without a TES, or total encapsulating suit. These conditions were designed to slow the J-Rod's disease. Prior to any interaction, the clean sphere containing the J-Rod was elevated from a restricted lower level via precision engineered scissor lift system. Due to strict compartmentalization protocols, Dan was not informed of the rationale behind the lower level containment, the life support procedures in place, or the identities of personnel assigned to the being's care. Before entering the sphere, Dan underwent strict decontamination, including a full-body disinfectant spray before donning the TES suit, similar to an astronaut's. The suit featured a long umbilical hose for oxygen and temperature control, creating a positive pressure. Sealed environment to protect him from potential microbes during contact with J-Rod. His eyeglass prescription was eventually beveled directly into the helmet glass. The J-Rod identified himself to Dan as Kaila. Dan described him as approximately 3 to 3.5 feet tall, with a dark brown, ruddy complexion. He belonged to a class of grays originating from the Zeta Reticuli binary star system, though he was stationed at Gliese 876c as a known staging area. The designation J-Rod translates to 15, referring to the number of light years from Earth. Kaila was classified as a P plus 52 J-Rod, meaning he was 52,000 years more evolved than present-day humans. At the time of the crash, he had been traveling with two P plus 45s. Physically, Kaila had a reticulated, lizard-like skin texture that was smooth to the touch. His head was disproportionately large, with large black eyes, a recessed nose with two small holes, and a small slit-like mouth with no teeth. He had long arms with 4 extended fingers and a noticeable knob at the heels of his feet. Suffering from severe neuropathy, he often appeared hunched over and had difficulty with movement. His appearance was described as insect-like or almost exoskeletal at times. At the time, he was 622 years old. While in the clean sphere, Dan's protocol required him to take skin aspirations from the J-Rod's arm with a special gun-like device. This is an AI simulation I created of Dan taking one of the aspirations from the entity. Between 1994 and 1996, Dan used the pressurized induction needle system to extract hundreds of tissue samples from the J-Rod's arm. These samples were willingly provided by the J-Rod under prior agreements. Although the procedure was painful, Dan later revealed that he maintained a continuous psychic connection with the entity whenever he was within approximately 60 feet. One of the more fascinating byproducts of this connection was that Dan reportedly experienced the J-Rod's pain during each aspiration in real time. He performed the extractions using his left hand, applying pressure for 15 minutes following each procedure. Over time, more than 200 samples were analyzed and included in a final report. Let's transition to another incredible claim by Dan, but one that would be revealed through another piece of technology within the facility called the Orion Cube. In the summer of 2007, Dan was inducted into a classified intelligence project that required 6 months of total isolation from friends and family. By December, he met with UFO investigators Carrie Cassidy and Bill Ryan, speaking with them for over 5 hours. During the conversation, he revealed that the project involved a device known as the Orion Cube, technology capable of viewing probable future events. The project's objective was to determine which of these futures was most likely to unfold. The Orion Cube, a quantum viewing device, is described as a holographic record that documents history and presents future occurrences and probabilities. This device is a variant of the looking glass technology, notable because its input projected above could be altered by the presence and emotions of its users. At one time, this cube was believed to be stored at Area S4, Level 4-1. Later, it was moved to the Scottish Rite Masonic Temple just outside Washington, D.C., and its location after that is unknown. The cube was reportedly used by elitists in various countries to look into their own futures and select favorable paths, but is now believed to be no longer accessible. The outcome of the 6-month project was Timeline 1, Variation 83, which, according to projections, pointed to a future marked by the election of Hillary Clinton, a massive financial collapse, and a catastrophic event that would ultimately lead to the division of humanity into 2 distinct life forms. Dan further explained that world leaders had begun using the cube as a kind of script, taking preemptive actions in an attempt to steer or nudge events away from that projected future. Importantly, the predicted events, such as Hillary Clinton's 2008 election, ultimately did not occur, suddenly suggesting that these nudging efforts and humanity's collective conscious successively altered the most possible future timeline, offering a message of hope and agency. I created this infographic to simplify the message Dan had from that 2007 program. Essentially, there would be an Earth catastrophe that would have been made aware of in advance, but would claim the lives of 4 billion. But in anticipation of this significant population, but I'm sorry, but in anticipation of this, a significant population would migrate off planet to Mars, and another lives subterranean in underground zones. After some time, the Mars population resets in the Orion constellation, where the subterranean group, after 4,000 years, resets far away at the Zeta Reticular system. The evolutionary changes because of the difference in the environmental conditions creates the tall Orions, and the ones that were subterranean become the gray or J rods. Eventually, they reunite in the future in 52,000 years. But the J rods slowly have been suffering from their peripheral neuropathy, a declination in their inability to maintain their glycoproteins. Former Bush administration official and Wall Street veteran Catherine Austin Fitts shared with Tucker Carlson this year that between 2021 and 2023, she worked with one of the most knowledgeable subscribers in their Solaria report network to research and compile data, both documented and alleged, on underground bases and transportation systems. While some are officially acknowledged as part of the national security infrastructure, her findings suggest many more exist, both across the United States and beneath the surrounding oceans. Her estimate, based on 2 years of analysis, is approximately 170 underground bases connected by transportation networks. She asserts that such infrastructure could serve critical purposes in the event of a near extinction scenario. Dan's claims are entered into congressional record last year. I discovered that journalist Michael Schellenberger included Dan's case in his submission into record after his November 13th House Oversight Committee hearing on unidentified anomalous phenomenon. Dan's name is noted 9 times in the submitted documentation, including another person, Henry Deacon, who vouched for the veracity of Dan's claims. Michael was there primarily to give testimony about the recently leaked Immaculate Constellation Pentagon program. But within this, he submitted documentation were others who worked on programs of note. Dan's name is noted 9 times here in the submitted documentation. This is a matter of record. You can look it up right now. A 27-year-old Harold Malmgren literally saved the world from nuclear catastrophe during the Cuban Missile Crisis when Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara and President JFK asked him to buy time for diplomacy by facing off against General Curtis LeMay. Malmgren went on to become a presidential advisor, not to just JFK, but LBJ, Nixon, and Ford. He had a personal relationship with Putin and advised every Japanese prime minister since Tanaka in the 70s. Giscard, d'Estaing, Pompidou, and others. He was assigned to contain Kissinger and work closely with Howard Baker, George Shultz, Volcker, and Mondale, not to mention Nobel Prize winners Tom Schelling and Sir John Hicks. Unusually, he had all the so-called Q clearances as well. From a 3-hour interview on American Alchemy, just before his passing in February 2025, he claims to have held a UFO or UAP material directly. That Richard Bissell briefed Malmgren on other world technologies. That he also discussed the Majestic 12, the MJ-12 group, who took it upon themselves to protect the world. He also told his daughter Pippa, off air in his final hours, that there had been a UFO crash. Survivors, and he was shown a video of the sole surviving extraterrestrial being from such crash as Roswell. From the time Harold was just 14, let's look at the connection to Dan being young. From the time Harold was just 14, he was already displaying advanced and utterly inexplicable grasp of quantum physics concepts, years ahead of experimental confirmation. He caught the attention of Carl Compton, the president of MIT. After an impromptu 2-hour conversation, Compton offered Harold a full scholarship on the spot, noting Harold's astonishing insight into photons and quantum entanglement, ideas not yet mainstream. Let's take the variety of claims and find agreement where it appears indisputable. Highly corroborated, Dan exhibited early aptitude for microbiology and was mentored from an age of 8 by Dr. James Reynolds, and became the youngest member of the Los Angeles Microscopical Society and possessed an eidetic memory. Supported by his listing in the Marquis Who's Who, as well as descriptions of his scientific writings as profound, this is strongly supported by Bill Hamilton and was fundamentally the core of Dan's story that he was telling the truth. Linda Moulton Howe expressed to me personally that she felt this was one of the strongest cases ever. The late Dr. Roger Lear was extremely impressed. Dr. J. Hertog found his work fascinating. Bill Ryan felt his story felt real and that Dan believed it. Dr. Michael Sala, Mark McCandlish, David Wilcock, Michael Schratt, and Paula Harris also expressed belief in his truthfulness. Affidavits, I'm sorry, here. Sorry, I want to stop at affidavit. There are multiple out there. Affidavits from Dan's mother, Doreen Crane, and a former co-worker, Robert Bird, concerning his PhD, as well as affidavit from Drew Sprengler, an Area 51 supervisor, corroborating Dan's presence and work. Marcia McDowell also mentions in her own affidavit. Supported by observers like Bill Ryan, who noted his authenticity and passionate disposition, it's also clear Dan's own expressions of deep frustration within those who misrepresents his experiences. I got to tell you, at this point, you need to watch some of his video interviews. He does appear very authentic. The Caltech credibility, supported by the nature of the prestigious academic venue and positive endorsements from the attendees like Dr. Roger Lear, and the source by invitee Caltech professor Humana Wadi. Finally, the Tom Mack letter unquestionably connects Dan to an alien study program at Area 51. Now, although there are a number of implications to draw from this extraordinary case, here are some I have compiled for reflection. Extraterrestrial treaties exist and influence choices done on our behalf without our knowledge. A significant catastrophe may have been averted from our future and split the evolution of mankind's future to two directions. Groups like the former MJ-12 are aware of this future and operate quietly in the shadows, sometimes clashing with agendas of other factions. Reality and consciousness are far beyond what we perceive. Multiple timelines and time travel are real. And also, others like Dan likely exist, some silenced, others hidden from contact. This is but a snapshot of some of the critical milestones of Dan's story that I continue to update. This is my own personal timeline. Finally, after finding that my good friend Bill passed in 2014, as a kind of conclusion, Bill wrote the following about the Dan Burisch case. After all that I've heard, and after piecing together over 20 different amazing testimonies, I think I finally understand the reason for the cover-up. It is a story that spans eons of time and devolves on who we are and who they are. We are all related, and DNA is the gem of the cosmos. There is so much that now makes sense. And once I had threaded it all together, that I am amazed at the feel of it, the truth of it, and the miracle of space, time, and life. The one thing I have heard time and again is that time is short, that time is running out, that big changes are ahead, and that the world may never be the same again. Only when I check this further will I report on it. This is not just another UFO story. This is the cosmic code. There for all of us, and the cosmic code is there for all to use their intelligence to decipher. So now I want to just thank you, and I want to thank your MUFON chapter. And finally, I direct people this time to make note that I've created the Burisch archive, and it's at burisharchive.com, and maybe that can be linked into this somehow, and you're welcome to scan this QR code and go to the website. On it, you're going to find much more of my research, further details of some of the things I've provided here, and every interview of Dan that is available to date is on my website. So it gives you an opportunity to research it and look into it yourself. So with that, I want to thank you and happy to take note. Take some questions.
This is Mike. It's a great presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah, two questions, but they're short. The first one is, you mentioned Bob Lazar.
Mhm.
Did he know Bob Lazar personally or ever meet him?
He spoke a number of times of hearing Bob's name being mentioned there. He did not meet Bob Lazar because there was no overlap. Bob was let go after or before Dan was brought into the program there.
So you don't know if they were friends or acquaintances aside from
No.
work then at all?
No, and Bob is a staunch disbeliever of Dan's case, but I would contend that Bob never looked at all of the material, and I hope in the near future I have an opportunity to present it to him.
And did he ever make any reference or anything about the Serpo project?
I don't recall anything I've read about the Serpo project coming from Dan. No.
The
I
reason I
think
ask is,
yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Reason I ask is supposedly they were from Zeta Reticuli. And
Yeah,
supposedly that's the same group that took Barney and Betty Hill. So I'm
Yeah,
wondering if that alien that was there, they said was from Zeta Reticuli. I wonder if there was any correlation to the Serpo project with that or anything else.
well, I think what you will find, let me just back up and rephrase how I want to answer this. I think what this case did for me, evident by hopefully what you saw in this presentation, if all of these claims of Dan's are true, it does piece together and connect dots of things we heard from the past. He claims that they were from Zeta Reticuli. The Gliese 876c was a temporary staging area for them to make trips to Earth. But Zeta was definitely the place that they come from. So yeah, there is a connection there with the Zeta Reticuli star system. But I'm not aware of Dan's opinion on Serpo.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Any other questions in the room? Or raise your hand if you're online. Oh, got a question over here. Hang on.
Thanks, Brian. Great presentation.
Thank you.
You mentioned the name Bill Uhouse. Bill was a programmer, I guess, worked on some aircraft projects. Have you ever heard of the IRC-10 or the IRC-30?
No, in relation to what specifically?
Well, Bill Uhouse supposedly worked on a made craft, a UFO craft, or made by the US government and possibly used to travel.
I'm not aware of one that Bill Uhouse worked on that traveled, but Bill Uhouse, at least later in the projects he was involved in, worked on a simulator craft. Now, I understand that to be a stationary craft used, but there may be evidence I'm not aware of that it was also a flying vehicle as well. But I know that he worked on a flight simulation component of a project, of a craft.
Cool. We have a question that was put in the chat, and they're asking approximately what year was that catastrophe supposed to have had happened?
Wouldn't we all like to know? It was supposed to be post 2012, and that 2012 was going to be a very, very important timeline crossing that was going to be happening. So in 2007, when he was on this project to look into future events, they knew it was going to be just post 2012. Nothing beyond that was ever specified.
Brian, I have a question for you. And by the way, that was a phenomenal presentation. Thank you
Thank you.
so much. Can you talk a little bit about Dan's relationship with Kayla? They had an incredible relationship, a friendship. Can you talk a little bit about how that was formed and how that ended?
Yeah, well, although it's a scientific project he was involved in, the ultimate detail that he was going to have a psychic connection with the entity when he was close by it. I think he was probably it was unexpected that he would form a kind of relationship because psychically they were having exchanges apparently when he was in close proximity to the clean sphere when he's brought into the project. And that obviously what yielded from many of these visits for the tissue sampling was a yielding of information about both of them. And Dan claimed that the J-Rod explained a lot about his background, a lot about the program, a lot about the technology transfer, and that the crash of Kingman was supposed to be a gifting of a craft, and it was not meant to crash. But yes, there became an emotional attachment. Dan is a very emotional individual, and he learned of the J-Rod's condition, but also of the J-Rod's history and family, and that he did come from a planet that has essentially formed relationships with other beings there that kind of lacks a spiritual base, very, very numeric. Their world revolves around numerology, and is a kind of gray, dark, and dank kind of atmosphere. But yes, there was definitely a connection, and there even nicknames they gave each other, apparently.
That was a phenomenal presentation. Thank you very much, first of all.
Thank you.
So my question revolves around J-Rod and the whole Serpico storyline. The part of that storyline, the basis of it is that there was a communication device that they were able to get working from the crash, and J-Rod was able to, or they were able to contact and communicate with J-Rod's home planet. Is there any proof of this communication device or any hearsay of it?
Yeah, no, I believe that to be true. The devices that were used between the Orion Cube and the Looking Glass device, and maybe other technologies I'm not aware of, and Dan's not aware of, there was some form of ongoing communication with the home base planet, because there was, in the latter part of Dan's work on the program, there was a scenario that was established in Egypt where Dan was flown in to assist in a project that had to do with communication with the base planet, and that the project also involved opening up a Stargate using the Looking Glass technology. And as strange and unbelievable as it sounds, amongst all this other stuff that sounds nuts, Dan took it upon himself to push the J-Rod through the Stargate, essentially hoping that he would have made it back to his base planet. These are things that I just, this is going deep down the rabbit hole. It's harder to verify this kind of claim, but yes, those devices and those kinds of technologies seem to have potentially existed.
Cool. We got a question in the chat from Sig. And Sig, I'm actually going to ask you to unmute so you can speak to him directly. So I'm going to send you a request. You should see a little pop-up saying that you'd ask you to unmute. Did that go?
I don't know what, can you hear me?
Yes,
We
I
can hear
can
you.
say.
I just wondered whether you're familiar with the book UFOs, Myths, Conspiracies, and Realities by John B. Alexander, who seems to thoroughly debunk MJ12. He doesn't get into Burisch or some of the other personalities you mentioned, but I just wondered whether you're aware of John B. Alexander and his work.
I'm familiar with John Alexander for sure. I'm not aware of that book, and I was unaware of his claims that attempts to debunk the MJ12 when there's now growing anecdotal support that there was a group. Undoubtedly, there must have been one if we're to take all of this information we're all investigating. And I don't know at what basis he would have tried to debunk that. I'm good friends with a gentleman that has essentially spent his life studying the MJ12 papers and what the MJ12 group is and the veracity of the claims that existed. And he seems to think undoubtedly there was. So I don't want to overstep and say anything about John, he may have very compelling and persuasive data. I just can say that I'm not really familiar with his claims.
He writes that the MJ12 myth eclipses all other UFO-related conspiracies and cannot be ignored if one is to engage in research in this field.
Okay, that's great. I would wonder what the anecdotal support he has besides his claim, because I know he comes with an impressive background, but that alone doesn't persuade me that he's making a good case personally.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Cool. Any other questions online or questions in the room? Questions in the room?
I guess my question is there any specific, is there any proof of why they're coming here? Why are they, know what I mean? Is there any evidence behind that, or why they keep coming here? Is it just for vegetables? What, X, Y, and Z? Know what I mean?
Yeah,
Thanks.
no, I know what you mean. And the reason, according to Dan, that they're coming here is to correct their genetic issues that happen in the future. Thus, the agreements that were established starting around 1952 was that there would be an agreement with a certain number of abductions that were going to allow them to do genetic study on human beings and to alter our genetic future so that in our future, the future species would not have this peripheral neuropathy issue that affects their life form. The secondary issue is to warn and educate humanity about the coming catastrophe that created their race. Now, that doesn't apparently determine that they will not exist in the future. And I have written about this on my website as one of my articles because it's a point of contention. If they're coming back here to warn us, to make us, have a positive outlook on the future and that will affect whether the catastrophe happens or not, doesn't that mean they're not going to exist in the future? That does not necessarily mean that. But their intention was to have the abductions, and one faction of the J-Rods are continuing with them even today, and the other faction ended with as the agreements were determined. So there's kind of two factions working against each other in the abduction scenario, apparently.
Did J-Rod talk about Earth's religion?
I'm not aware of that. And, I've created an AI searchable database on everything of Dan's claims. I'm going to look into that. That might be an article I run on my website. Dan is religious. He actually went to seminary to become a priest. He was raised Catholic, and he's a very spiritual individual. So I'm sure that would have been something he wanted to gain knowledge of.
Right.
But yeah, it's one that affects me personally as well. But I'm not aware of any claim Dan makes about that.
How about our future demise?
Well, that would come from what his claims are as it relates to the coming catastrophe, in that some of us will go underground for thousands of years, some of us will have gone off planet in advance, and that upwards of 4 billion will perish here.
But did he say what kind of demise it was?
He said it was a combination of things that are going to be happening that are both cataclysmic in terms of having to do with the Earth's relationship within our galaxy being too close to some catastrophic scenario that will create pole shifts and other things, and also the potential additional catastrophe of a nuclear war. It sounds like it's a bundle of things, actually, not just one. And I'm not sure it's just one single episode that happens instantaneously. I'm not aware. But it's
Sounds
enough.
so close to what we're going through.
You know what, Mildred? I'll be honest, and from all I've come to be aware of from Dan's claims, I see everything going on politically and geopolitically and socially through that lens, wondering if this knowledge is a fact, are we preparing? Is there some sort of strategic initiative involved globally? Things are happening that I look through that lens and I try to rationalize. It's an interesting time to witness all of this if you're to believe the claims, of course.
Right. I agree.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Great question.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just remind everybody, I am available through my website, burisharchive.com. And through there, you can read my materials, you can see the videos, and I'm contacted through there too.
Well, we do have another question here in the room.
I wondered on the abductions, if they were taking and just not harmed, or were they taking and not brought back, or, we heard about what went on in Serpol when the two people died there, supposedly. They were used for experiments or whatever. So I just wondered about that.
Great question. And I'm going to I'm not going to claim any expertise to Serpo. I'm not going to eliminate it as a possibility. I just don't know enough about that aspect of the study. The according to the claims of the J-Rods who were cooperating with the agreements, the intention was not to ever take any individual permanently, but to take genetic sampling material. And the idea was that they were going to use females to reinsert and slowly change the genetic makeup so that in the future we have an alternate outcome. So I'm not aware of anything that was supposed to be a permanent taking of anybody. I'm not aware of anything darker than, obviously the abduction scenario alone is dark, but eating humans or anything strange like that. Nothing coming from the J-Rod's claims to Dan about that. Just genetic manipulation was the goal.
This alien J-Rod, is that what they called him?
Yeah, that's the species of designation is J-Rod. Yeah.
How was he kept alive, or what was required? What kind of conditions, what kind of energy, or how did they do that?
Well, the program which kept him alive required the clean sphere that I showed in my presentation. That was it's essentially a closed chamber with a certain positive pressure and other environmental conditions that I outlined that were there to keep him alive. And they even had a smaller transportation unit that was like a Segway device that was a bubble-shaped device that allowed him to be transported and still keep within his environmental conditions. So there was an effort for that. And it's a very sophisticated environment that if you're to enter into it like Dan had to, there's very strict protocols in how you get decontaminated, put on a special suit. There's hosing, there's oxygen. It's a whole team that enters into it. So he was kept alive under conditions that were from the efforts of many before him, for sure.
So back to the last question in terms of the alien being kept there, were there anything they had to do in terms of like food or water or feeding them intravenously or anything like that?
So this is an aspect of the program I'm sure Dan would have loved to know more about, but he was not allowed based on the strict protocols of what his project was involved in. He understood that they secrete through their skin, but I don't know how they ingest. It seems like their mouth was not for eating, apparently, according to Dan. So I don't know exactly how they ingest any sort of life-giving material. So that's an unknown in terms of what I've understood from my research.
Did Dan ask J-Rod the ultimate question, why are we here?
No, I'm not aware of that question. I mean, we're supposedly, the J-Rods had been visiting since we were Neanderthals and working in genetically at changing us. So the why in its ultimate genesis of a question, I don't know if that's ever answered in any of the material Dan has. Sorry.
Did he ask him how we got here? How in the beginning?
This is okay. The best way I want to answer that is the latter part of Dan's scope of research, which he's still doing today, and which he wanted me to be involved in for a short time, believe it or not. His Lotus research, which has to do with the genesis of a life-giving capability of a certain kind of mineral, or this is going to get, I'm going to be really skating at the edges of my knowledge here in the sciences, but there's a kind of silicate material here on Earth that when it is hit with the right conditions, it can help produce life. And Dan thinks, whether it's through, what is the term, panspermia, that there may have been a space life-giving dust or something that eventually made its way to Earth here. And this material would have naturally absorbed it and created life from it. So this is something Dan is working on now, and he's going to release it to Library of Congress and have it peer reviewed. It's his work on the Lotus protocol is what he calls it.
About how old is Dan?
Dan is 1 year younger than me. He is 61.
How, I mean, we're seeing what was it, the cube sphere, the Orion cube? And
Yes.
the looking glass, they seem to be very advanced. Are we, with all the research you've done, are we to believe that the Space Force is very advanced? How far advanced is our government that they're not telling us?
I think that's unquestionably advanced. And I don't even think you need to be involved in the UFO studies to know that. Between the advancements that DARPA's been making and the idea that we're at least 30 years behind what military technology advancements is being done in secret with trillions of dollars being spent on research, I don't think there's a question that there's an advancement. Now, coming back to our interest in UFOs, there is good reason to believe that that's by virtue of our relationship with the others, the entities, and the craft that have been gifted us for back engineering. So there is any number of scenarios of how advanced we possibly could be. Whether you want to, talk about time travel, material, transmedium travel, many advancements I think would be science fiction to most people.
I have another question.
Go for it.
Do you think Elon Musk is part hybrid because of his intelligence and wanting to get to the moon?
That question's asked a lot lately, and usually met with some laughter. I don't have really an opinion about that. I do believe personally, I don't have any anecdotal or supporting evidence for it. I do believe the idea of hybrids do exist. The sheer number of stories I've heard of people who've come in contact with them does make sense that they could pass walking down the street. But I have no opinion about that as it relates to Elon Musk. But who knows? That's a fun one to think about.
Do you think people that have the alien shaped head and eyes that walk around, do you think they're hybrid?
Well, I guess it depends on how dissimilar to us you're speaking of. I've not encountered anybody like that personally. And
Yeah,
that's-
they look just like a regular human, but they
Okay.
have that egg shaped head. And it's like you can look at them and say, "Oh my God, is that a hybrid?"
Okay, I'm not familiar with the head scenario. I'm familiar with the eyes. People saying they've seen and encountered people that have slightly large eyes or vertical pupils. That comes to mind, and I don't know, there's all forms, I guess, of strange cranial shapes.
Look around, you'll see them.
Great. I'll have something to not sleep about tonight.
Yeah, I gotta admit, I was at a conference a few years ago and I was standing in like the entry, kind of like in the common area, and there was a woman that walked by me that was significantly shorter than me. She was very, very frail looking, and I didn't notice anything unusual about the size of her head, but her eyes were very dark and they seemed to be a little bit further apart than I expected them to be. And she kind of looked at me and I kind of looked at her and I just kind of, I went, she doesn't look like she's exactly human. And I just kind of, I don't know, I want to start exuding the feeling of love. And she looked at me for a few seconds and walked on by, and I never saw her the rest of the weekend. So I don't know who she was or why she was there or if she was human or not, but I did see a person that kind of, other than the size of the head, kind of fit that description. So
Yeah.
That is interesting. I've heard many stories somewhat similar to that. Yeah.
okay, well, I do want to say too, because people have asked, I was at the symposium a few weeks back, and I went to the Wright-Patterson Air Force National Museum, and I was surprised. The guy that introduced us from the Air Force Museum, he was a MUFON member, and the Air Force Museum has really, really embraced the whole UFO alien stuff. So in the gift shop and all that, I was really surprised at how much they've embraced that. So that was actually kind of cool. But I think everyone's going to agree, Brian Jackson, fantastic presentation. Let's give him applause. And we have had our challenges at this meeting. We could not have done it without Risa and without Peter and Eric and Tori. They did a fantastic job making this happen. I couldn't have done it without them. Let's give them a big round of applause too. So.
Thank you.
Clap, clap.
Okay, so that's going to wrap it up for our meeting this month. We'll be back here next month, second Saturday of the month. We've got lots of speakers committed to speaking, none's committed to speaking next month. So we're going to work on getting them all slotted in. But I want to thank you, everyone here who's here in person in Brighton, everyone who's joined us online. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the meeting. Take good care of yourselves. Take good care of each other. Keep your eyes on the skies, and we will see you next time, everybody. Have a good